light of Brexit, should South African consumers be bracing for things like interest rate hikes, for example? Joining me to discuss trends in the economic landscape, Wason, founder and chief executive of IDM Group. Also, secretly and privately, he is a former staffer on the Boris Johnson campaign for the mayorship of London, which they won. And I think he voted in the recent Brexit campaign as well. Marthinus Fourie, he's the managing director of BSmart here in Cape Town. They're both YPO members. You've got to, and Wes, declare your interest here. You and Boris Johnson, your besties?
We worked together for about 7 weeks. I was part of the campaign team to get him re-elected 5 years ago.
5 years ago. You didn't work with him this time, though, on the Leave campaign.
No.
Because he was a key figurehead of that Leave campaign, certainly within the Conservative Party establishment in Britain.
Yeah, and I think it's... Look, I don't think it's not an easy decision whether you vote in or out in the EU referendum. And I think his heart was probably in the right place, but much like everybody else, it was an incredibly difficult decision to come to because there's no right or wrong about it. That being said, politically, it's turned out rather nicely for him.
Well, time will tell whether or not it's turned out very nicely for him. He's not the most popular figure in Conservative politics right now.
Amongst whom?
Amongst the establishment, the Conservative establishment.
Yes.
Now, it
the
all
political
depends.
Urban elite.
The political urban elite. And that's what's so interesting about this. London is a little bit like Cape Town or a little bit like Santon. People think that is the world that is inhabited by real people. Real people live elsewhere. Real people operate elsewhere, don't they? And Britain, or England particularly, voted very much against being in the European Union. I
came home on Friday to find my wife sitting on the sofa, and she just looked up at me from her perusing social media, and she said, "Ian, please tell me why you're the only person we know who voted out."
You did vote out?
I voted out, yeah, I would declare that.
You backed Boris?
I didn't back Boris, I backed out.
Why?
Because I think that the EU is a wonderful idea. It's a wonderful concept. It is a political concept. Economically, it's what the EU has now become is economic sort of madness. Politically, it's kept Europe at peace for the last 70 years, and that is wonderful, and that certainly cannot be discounted. Although interesting how the OAPs voted, and
the old age pensioners.
The old age pensioners and my
the people who have
generation.
No interest at all in the future. Yes.
Yes, but who experienced war, or certainly experienced rationing,
yeah.
And knew that the outcomes of that.
You say, though, and I think I'll quote you accurately, that this is the first time in human history that people have voted, and Marthinus will give you a turn, I promise. The first time in human history that people have actually voted to be poorer. I would argue that one of the reasons why people voted to get out of the European Union is because they feel poorer and blame Europe as a result, post-2008.
Yeah, it's obviously easy to pin a lot of blame on Europe, but this is a kind of vote against the establishment to a large degree. You saw the strong sort of Labour heartlands really voting against their leader.
Well, for how long, yes.
Yeah, certainly what he said he was going to vote for. I don't know quite how he voted. And they voted against him because they believed this so strongly, because it was a vote against the sort of intellectual urban elites. London is a completely different country from the rest of the UK. That's how they voted.
Marthinus, do you want to smack him in the mouth for voting out? Because I sit here in South Africa, the rand is weakened against the euro and the dollar. The value of my pension fund has declined since Friday by 10%. Correct. Thank you so much, Ian Wason. I know that they don't mind being poorer, but I object. How about you?
I think, Bruce, my biggest concern is actually the South African consumer, and what is happening to us in our country and our consumer. And if you look at the stats, then you'll see that since 2000, the consumer has got the lowest spending power in terms of disposable income, paying for electricity rates, taxes, services that they're not possibly getting to what they expect to get. And then you've seen in the insurance industry that in Feb and in March, they've had the biggest number of declines in debit orders sent back, people not having the ability to pay. So the consumer is definitely under huge pressure.
A huge amount of that is domestic, and a huge amount of that is our own national sport. I mean, we've got a couple of national sports. One of them is skating on thin ice. The other is shooting ourselves in the foot. And if those were Olympic pursuits, we'd bring home gold. I've absolutely no doubt about that. But we're also part of a struggling global environment.
Yes.
And Ian hasn't helped. I'm blaming you.
Haven't I helped? Why do you say I haven't helped?
You haven't helped. I'm poorer as a result of your outfit.
Well, look, I mean, the rand has fallen not because of anything to do with South Africa. It's because of the risk-off trade, and South Africa gets the rand gets smacked whatever happens.
You've made
if it was a Remain vote, it would still get smacked.
You've made the world a less certain place.
I don't know. I mean, how much trade is done from South Africa to the UK?
And the UK is a big consumer of agricultural products out of South Africa, strong ties, big businesses. Brait. Have you seen what's happened to Brait? Have you seen what's happened to Capital and Counties? Have you seen what has happened
to
Fourie? All of these guys who put faith in the British establishment and are getting punished for it.
Well, I think unfortunately it's not the end. You've seen the right parties in France, in the Netherlands saying we want a referendum now. Scotland possibly is going to have a second one. So the world are changing, and people are saying, I want to vote. I don't want the elite to forever rule me. I want to have a say in my local district, in my local community, and not playing to somebody else's violin where I'm sitting 20,000 miles away from that particular person.
Tragically, though, we absorb the consequences of big political decisions, whether it's Britain voting, and it's perfectly legitimate. 52% of people who did vote in Britain voted to leave the European Union.
Yes.
I understand why they did it. There are many people in the United States who may very well vote anti-establishment and go for Donald Trump as President of the United States. Again, we become on the receiving end of those decisions by ordinary people all over the world.
No, correct. I think, Bruce, at the end of the day, we are part of the global community. We are a resource-driven economy, but we're also agricultural and a tourism-driven economy. And that's the reality of playing in that fraternity. Plus, our uncertain political environment, unfortunately, makes us an interesting subject for discussion.
But certainly does. But Ian, I point a finger at you and I say it's all your fault. It's partly your fault.
Yes, one of 17 million.
Yes, one of you and 16,999,000 of your closest friends. How does this play out in the minds of people who voted out of the EU? Because my sense of it is the out voters are a bit like the dog that caught the bus. You've got the bus, and now you don't quite know what to do with it.
Okay, so hold on, just going back to your point of this is bad news for the South African consumer.
Short term.
Short term, sure, but you've got 2 years, the UK has got 2 years to after they've put in Article 50 to get out of the EU.
And there's huge pressure on them to do it sooner rather than later.
Sure, yeah.
And David Cameron's not keen
I
to
rather
do it.
agree that we need to buy a bit of time here and get the team together to do it. But of course, this does mean that the UK is then free to introduce a new trade agreement with South Africa. And South Africa, see, having lived in South Africa for the last 12 years, I'm very much a pro-Commonwealth Englishman, rather than just looking at Europe. You know, we've looked at Europe for the last 43 years to the detriment of the Commonwealth. So I actually thought by voting out was also good for South Africa and South Africa's relationship with the UK, because we're now going to focus on that more.
Do you buy that, Marthinus?
Well, not completely.
It's the Boereoorlog, isn't it? Now you're going to get it back for that.
I think it's a question of how strong can you negotiate. And as Ian correctly says, there's a 2-year period that's going to show us what is going to happen now. And people want to move forward. And I think what you want to have is certainty. And the fact that there is so much uncertainty, especially on the political side that's flowing over onto the economical side, that's real causes for concern. And it's unfortunately not limited to a specific area only. It's in America, it's in Europe, it's in Africa, and people are coming to terms with the real reality of a global possible recession. In South Africa, we on the verge of a recession, if we're not already in a recession.
We could very well be. And in South Africa, case in point, The status quo has not worked for most people. The negotiated settlement post-1994 has been very good for, in South Africa, again, the elites who have been able to capitalize on globalization, been able to capitalize on new markets. The poor have, by and large, remained very poor and economically marginalized.
Correct.
Do we see South Africa doing its equivalent of a Brexit vote or its equivalent of a Donald Trump election at some point?
Well, I think if you look at the South African unemployed stats, and you're looking at 20% people that's unemployed, the only way you can uplift them is by creating an environment for growth. And that you can only do by creating proper jobs, creating an economy that can kickstart appointment of people, job creation,
all great in theory, and we know the theories, but in a global environment, which is so uncertain, that just became a whole lot harder.
No, correct, but I think charity starts at home, and you need to say, okay, so what can we as business people with the government do to be able to create job creation? And currently the investment that is needed is not happening in terms of kickstarting the economy, and a lot of the engagement and rules put in place for people to do easy business. Start up a business from a young age and getting a very quick response from regulatory authorities, that is difficult. It's difficult.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Nice to see you both. That is Ian Wason, founder, chief executive of IDM Group, and an out voter. You can blame, well, at least Britain's cheaper to visit this week than it was last week. And also Marthinus, Fourie, managing director of BSmart in Cape Town. Looking at the trends, the Brexit impact, of course, it continues to have an impact on your finances. Mostly, it is all about volatility. It's all about uncertainty. Is it going to make the hugest difference to your back pocket in the long term? Probably not. Till next time, bye-bye.